Hi, Minesh Baxi here, and I have another interesting guest today. Most of you may have traveled to other places or talked to people who have different languages. Maybe their native language is different from yours. And I don't know about you, but I was born in India, so the language that naturally comes in my brain is going to be first Indian languages before I speak up, and sometimes I use words which don't make any sense to people who are listening to English in their native language. So maybe you've never put the foot in the mouth as well. And here we have an expert today. Her name is Randi Lou Franklin, and she helps people with translation, interpretation, and she has a funny story to start off with. Would you mind sharing that?
It'd be my pleasure. Years ago, I had the pleasure of studying at Oxford in England. And when I went there, obviously my name was Randi Lou Franklin, just like it is right now. I went to meet a friend of mine here in the States, and I called the gentleman to tell him that I was a friend of this person and I was going to be studying there, and I'd like to meet him if he would show me around, whatever. And he says, "Oh, and your name is what?" And I said, "My name is Randy." And he says, "Randi Lou." And he says, "You're kidding." I said, "No, I'm not kidding. That's my name." He says, "Do you know what Randy means?" And I actually did know in British English, and Randy means not appropriate, not appropriate, but it's someone who likes to be with lots of people.
Yes, exactly. In an interesting situation. Yes.
And then my middle name is Lou, and I use my middle name, and the Lou is the toilet there in England. So my name was really inappropriate toilet. and so he found it very funny. He also asked me if my parents were British, that they had a very strange sense of humor if they were. I told him they aren't, and we went forward and we became good friends. But
again, it's what is interesting about this is people may not realize what other people have in their mind when they hear whatever you are saying.
Exactly. And that happens all the time. And when we're speaking, we were both speaking in English.
Correct.
And so now think about it when you're talking to someone and maybe English is not their native language, and their understanding of what you're saying may not necessarily be what you thought you said.
I agree with you totally. And there are so many mistakes people can make culturally speaking, also in terms of language, in terms of hand gesture, body language, etc. And we don't realize it because we don't know their systems, their way of looking at things, and that causes issues. And I think that's what happens. So tell me a little bit about your background. How did you get involved and started in this business?
Well, I actually used to run a Hispanic Legal Services in Southwest Detroit. And I loved what I was doing, more so working with the community and making sure that they were understood. I liked the linguistic aspect more than I liked the practice of law aspect. And so I just said, let me start this. Let me look around and see if there's something that I can really do with that. And then I had a couple opportunities in Macomb Circuit Court interpreting. People knew my name, knew that I was an interpreter, and the next thing I knew is that I was like, okay, let me proceed and see if I can turn this into a business. And that's 30 years now.
Wow.
So I've had my company now 30 years, and we've gone from just being me to now and working the languages that I was very fortunate because I've studied a number of languages and have been multilingual most of my life. But now we cover 150 languages. But it's so much fun, learning from different people and what goes on in their languages.
It's interesting, and I think because obviously I'm from India, in the beginning, when I came to U.S., I had a very tough time with the American accent.
Yes.
I was watching these news, and it was so hard for me because I was familiar with the accent in India, and I come to U.S., I can't follow the accent. It took me a while before I was comfortable following and understanding. And even today, when I listen to lyrics and songs, I'm always not so sure what I'm listening to. And that happens to me as well. And that's why I think one of the things that you provide is very valuable for a lot of people to be able to use.
Yes, well, it's really important to be able to understand each other. It's really hard to communicate if you're not on the same page. So sometimes, we think we understand, and just sometimes even going to meet someone, if you're meeting someone from a different culture, do you know if you should be shaking their hand or not? Man and a woman, and if they're, different, it's not just the language, but it's also maybe the religion and the aspects of that also affect one's ability to properly communicate.
I agree with you totally. And I think in that respect, let's imagine somebody who's here relatively without a lot of support. They are new to this country. The language is a little bit difficult for them to follow. Their own language is very different. They don't have too many people communicating. That can be a frightening situation.
Exactly. It's so frightening. And so when they meet someone, whether it's me or someone else who happens to speak their language, you suddenly become family.
I totally agree with you. Because now you find rapport, you find somebody who understands you, because the biggest challenge as human beings we have is nobody understands me.
So often, that's so true. And like even when you're trying to even go shopping or little things, you don't realize how many things and how often you need to communicate in whatever that language and culture is, and the various barriers that sometimes come across.
And I think language is, once you know the language of the place, wherever you are, suddenly it becomes much easier, because now and that's one of the reasons, fortunately or unfortunately, I travel to more places where they speak English rather than they don't speak English, because it's easier to travel to, say, New Zealand or other parts of the world where they speak English, because after all, it's easier to get along with people when they understand at least the same language and they're not having problems in the accent and the words like we just talked about right now. Right. So good. So tell me a little bit about your business. Who are you working with?
Well, I work with various automotive suppliers, of course, because we are here in the Metro Detroit area. But we also work with the courts. We work in medical facilities. We work with mom and pop shops. They may have employees that are from different cultures, and they want to make sure that they're understanding the rules, what's going on, and want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. So it helps when you have someone who comes in who will just interpret, maybe just at a meeting, or translate their paperwork, so that everyone is they're actually all on the same page, helping that business grow together instead of wondering if the people are really understanding them.
And I think that's a good point that you bring up. A lot of companies, we are in Troy, very diverse community. We have people from all different walks of the world, so to speak. And I mean, I'm from India, as you know, my wife is Chinese, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of people who need to have their message heard, and the employers need to communicate the message to the employees.
Exactly. And we even teach ESL for employers who want to make sure to help their employees able to communicate a little bit better. And so some employers have recently been hiring us to teach English as a second language. Not that their employees don't speak some English, but it shows that they're trying to communicate more effectively with them.
Yeah, and again, I think over a time period, as people get to understand whatever this is, and they're familiar with the country as well. So you have people who may come here for a short trip. They might need guidance, and some people who are here for a longer period as well. Tell us a little bit about the different types of people you end up working with.
Well, right now I'm working with a gentleman, for example, who I'm teaching him Spanish because he's often going to Mexico. And in fact, he thinks he may even be flying out on Monday to Mexico just because of problems that he's trying to nip in the bud. And it's easier when you're there in person. And so he's learning Spanish because it's so important to him. Not that he doesn't have employees who speak English and people who understand, but it shows also that since he's been studying, they're so happy that he's attempting to communicate. He knows he's not going to become bilingual, and he's not trying to, but he's trying to bridge that gap. We have numerous Bengali interpreters that work with in the courts right now, because we're We've been involved with a number of matters in the courts. Next week, we're working Wolof, which is one of the African languages, in the courts. So
that is amazing. That's very amazing, because I know you had contacted me as well, and I had been able to put you in touch with few people, and I think I helped you out with one assignment as well.
Yes, exactly. You
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
So and I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a number of years.
Yes.
So our paths have crossed a number of times over the years, and it's exciting to see how you've grown, how I've grown, how we've learned from some of our steps.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. So who are the people that you are trying to reach out to that should watch this, should learn about you, because they're having a challenge, but they need a solution? That would be you.
Well, the people that I would like to talk to, or at least let them know that we're out there, is that people who are either working globally and want to make sure that they're putting their message out correctly, not trusting the computer to translate it.
Which can be embarrassing.
Oh, it can be very embarrassing, and you don't even know that you're
Making a mistake.
making a mistake because you don't speak the language.
Yes.
Yet you're trusting someone else to do that. That's a machine. Those people, people who may even have children who are studying languages. We do tutoring as well. So we do foreign language tutoring and private classes, and then we create programs for companies, either teaching the language or teaching cultural issues, particularly those who are working globally.
Very interesting part of you. And I think, like, for example, companies like GM, Chrysler, who are launching vehicles in other parts of the world, and they have to make sure that the words they use to describe the vehicle or the name of the vehicle can be consistent with how the people perceive in that language as well.
Everyone knows the story about, Chevrolet and Nova, and they wondered why people didn't buy it in Mexico, because Nova means it doesn't run. It doesn't go. Okay, so who's going to buy a vehicle that says that it doesn't go? And then there used to be a company called American Motors, and they used to have a vehicle called Fuego, which means fire. And who wants to buy a vehicle, that says that it may catch on fire? That's just not usually what we're looking for. So if you get the advice up front, then you don't have those issues, later on.
So how did they handle Nova? I never followed up on that one.
Well, the Nova, it was, fortunately, it was able to develop its own story, because they were using it actually for racing. And so they were able to sort of get over that. Now we know American Motors doesn't even exist anymore.
No.
So that goes with that story.
It was on fire. There was a fire sale for the movie,
Right.
for the book, for the story there as well. So that's pretty interesting. So you help in what kind of services, so people get a clarity about what you do?
Well, we translate documents.
You translate documents. Okay. Technical as well as otherwise?
We specifically like to work in technical, legal, and medical.
Okay.
But obviously, what you consider technical may not be so technical. Or if you have some papers, let's say you had surgery abroad, which is very common these days, and then you bring your paperwork back to your regular doctor to show them whatever you did. Well, they didn't necessarily write everything out in all their notes. Maybe some of the main information is in English, but all of the notes of the surgical procedures and everything else often are in another language. Right now we're about to be translating from Swedish for a client of ours who has a case involving some issues in its medical and its Swedish medical paperwork. So we're about to dive into that.
So translation is one of them.
Yes, and then we do interpreting, which is oral.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's interpreting in the courts, but it doesn't have to be in courts. It can be in a medical exam, or interpreting, like I mentioned, like for healthcare benefits for a company. There's several of the automotive suppliers will go in when they're having a major meeting, and we'll just provide the interpreting at the meeting. And it's a whole lot cheaper to have us come in, third parties, not non-interested in what's being said, and actually say everything, than maybe having an employee try to do it, but the employee has an interest in being what's being said. And if for some reason it gets botched up, that little amount of money that you pay to have an interpreter there versus calling your lawyers to get you out of trouble is substantially different.
I totally agree with you. So how do people get hold of you?
Well, on the internet, www.interlinguaonline.com, or our number is 313-378-2999. I've had it for a long time. Kept everything. People say, "My goodness, I can still reach you." I even kept some of my old email addresses so that they could, yes, I have other ones, but it's like, you can add more, but don't get rid of what started.
Exactly. People can still find you. And I think I totally agree with you on that. Fantastic. Well, I hope you learned a lot about it, where you can have a resource available if you need translation, interpretation services. And Randi Lou has been in the business for 30 years, so she can find you the right person to help you get the job done.
And it's been a real pleasure. And it's always, I really have enjoyed learning from you, and all of you do.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being
Minesh,
here.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.